Let's begin. So it's a real honor for us to have Dr. Kent Schull here today. He has been here before, so he may look familiar to some of you.
A little whiter than last time, though. And it's pandemic pounds.
We all are a little whiter.
So anyway, so Kent is very distinguished. He's an associate professor of history. He's the immediate past chair of the history department. He's the current director of the Middle Eastern and North African Study Program. Did I get that right?
Center for Middle East and North Africa Studies. It's a new center now.
That's right. And they just got a huge government grant that Kent gets to spend. So anyway, in his scholarship, Kent is an Ottoman historian and teaches very, very widely. A lot of his scholarship has dealt with Ottoman institutions, their penal system, and so forth. He's also done a lot in missionary history. With missionaries, especially Mormon missionaries who went to the Middle East. And in more recent times, he's also gotten very involved in refugee history, particularly in the Mediterranean, which has seen more than its share of refugees, even down to the present. So today, and I might also add that he is the president of the board of the American Civic Association. And so today we're going to get a double blessing from him. He was going to talk about historical background of the refugee crisis in the Mediterranean, but also about the ACA, the American Civic Association. So Kent, it's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you very much, John. And thank you everybody for allowing me to come and talk to you again. Last time I was here, I think we talked about refugees as well. And not much, well, things have only gotten worse. So that's the skinny of it. So really quickly, how they've gotten worse is you can see very nicely up there on the screen. From 2012 until 2022, we've gone from 42.7 million roughly to an estimated 100 million in just over a decade of forcibly displaced persons. That's counting internally displaced persons within the area and then those who are refugees as well. So there's huge disparities between how refugees are treated and internally displaced persons are treated. One thing that the Institute for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention on campus is trying to work on is trying to create policies for more coherent protections of internally displaced persons as there are for refugees, those who cross an international boundary and get registered with the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. But there's huge disparities from country to country about how internally displaced persons are, and that's one of the biggest issues that we find, in trying to help those. Because basically, almost every refugee started out as an internally displaced person, almost every single one of them. And when you only rely on the good graces of individual countries of how they will be treated, most people who are internally displaced are a result of climate disasters, natural disasters, right? Economic dislocations, civil wars, that type of stuff. And most of the time, their countries, their home countries are either completely overwhelmed because of some type of a huge national disaster. Take the floodings in Bangladesh and Pakistan. Over the last couple of years, take other huge natural disasters, such as the earthquakes in Syria and in Turkey that happened last February. And then throw on top of that, in Syria, it's just like, insult to injury after a civil war that's been going on, continuously for 12 years in that area as well. You take that and put together with a devastating earthquake and massive aftershocks, and then you just have, it's just insult to injury in that regard. And so, as you can see, it's 100 million. That's a third of the population of the United States. So if we just take our room and our little group in here, 1 in 3 of us would be displaced at this point in time, meaning not access to your networks that you rely upon, your families, your homes, your places of residence. If it's, if you're renting a place, the shops, all the networks that you set up in place to be able to survive, many of them were wiped away immediately because of internal displacement. And then when you go across the border, you may be running into huge language barriers as well and other things. So it's, I can't overemphasize the issues at stake for somebody who is brave enough to leave, to pick up roots and to start over again. And I don't, while there is an issue of being a victim in some ways, right, of circumstances, there's also incredible resilience and strength and agency. You got to adapt quickly, or else you're not going to survive. And so all that together, I hope, upends some of the pictures that we often see in the media, like Save the Children or these other types of things. Look, situations can be very desperate, but these are incredibly brave and resourceful people as well. And that has to be recognized too, type of a situation. So, this paints a bleak picture. Mapping the world's refugee population, basically, top 10 origin countries. I mean, this sounds like a game show. I'm sounding like a game show host here for a second. I'm sorry. But the top 10 origin countries of people displaced across borders at the end of 2021. Very quickly, Venezuela shot up to being number 2 on this list. And this is a huge upending of situation of relationships in South America and Latin America here, because Venezuela used to be an incredibly wealthy country and a receiver of displaced persons from Colombia and others. Now it's flipped. And they don't have, so another thing that makes refugees incredibly resilient and displaced persons is that they start to link into new networks, or if they have family in other places, they try to link in with that network to be able to find a place. They just don't, spin the globe and put their finger on it and go, I'm going to go there, type of a situation. Oftentimes it's through the networks that they have of family members, distant relatives, or communities that they know, neighbors or others, places elsewhere. They have to ignite those. Venezuela, unfortunately, most of those populations don't have that same type, because this was not a place to migrate from, and now it is. And so this is causing quite an acute problem in Venezuela. And so, as you can see, Syria is still one of the top ones. Ukraine is not on here. This was before this came out, before the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And so add to that, right? So you can add now even more to if we go back one to the 100 million, right? This really wasn't incorporating Ukraine at this point in those numbers. And so it's just, it's incredible what's happening, and what we're trying to continue to face. So on another level, Turkey has been a receiver of refugees. This is an old map. This is dated in terms of numbers, but it does give you the sense of where Syrians are going as the number one place of origin in the world for displaced persons. The vast majority have gone to Turkey. It's at least a 3-to-1 ratio with the next largest, which is Lebanon, right? But it's been a seriously catastrophic situation, and with Turkey first receiving them in with open arms, and now it's become a political hot potato, so to speak. Each party that was just going in this most recent elections, the opposition party to Erdogan's Justice and Development Party, basically were trying to do a political hot potato of who could be most nationalist and xenophobic. And unfortunately, the opposition, which lost the elections, turned out to be the most xenophobic in their language right up towards the end in the runoff. So this has exacerbated problems for refugees in Syria as well, Syrian refugees in Turkey as well at this point, because they have been welcomed throughout the country, but now there's restrictions and problems, and Turkey is going through its own huge economic crisis at this point. And if you kind of notice where most of the world's refugee crises are, they're all in the global south, primarily in the global south. And those who receive the refugees are other countries in the global south. So they shoulder an enormous burden. And these are most of these countries, if I move forward again here, such as Lebanon, has its own huge political and economic crises. And they basically, their population has grown by 1/6 because of the Syrian refugees. They already had a very large Palestinian refugee population in that country as well. So this just exacerbates the tensions, the problems, the things that you see on the ground there. So there's a lot of continues to be a grim picture, because the Middle East has been a focus of Western intervention and imperialism for centuries now, a focus of war and nation building and capitalist expansion in terms of wanting the raw materials and access to goods and inexpensive labor. But it's also been the object of geopolitical and local, regional rivalries between different states, which all feed into exacerbate the situation of the notion that population transfer, in scare quotes, or the relocation of populations to create a more homogeneous national population, nation state, is a viable, is a viable conflict resolution item. This is dating back to World War I, when you had the Greek-Turkish population exchange in 1923. It's the 100th anniversary of that agreement to stop the war between Greece and Turkey at that point in time, and that they would swap populations. That became entrenched as a global conflict resolution measure to use. You take that, and that was heralded as a great political success when you basically uproot 2 million people in total and swap them into places where they've never lived. It's not their home. Many of them don't speak the language. That type of a situation. That became heralded in the model for Northern Ireland, the model for Israel-Palestine, the model for South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh eventually. This became North and South Korea, Vietnam, all these types of situations where the thought that population exchange was a viable mode of conflict resolution, all we see is continued long-term violence. And the war in Gaza right now is no different. When you have now 1.3 million people displaced from northern Gaza in a stretch of land that is probably the most densely populated in the world. That just continues, right? And those types of notions that the West has the right to redraw borders or pick sides or go in and talk about, I think I might have shown this. I'm going to flip forward real quick to the very last slide, because maybe I showed this last time, but I always use this in my classes. This was published in the U.S. Army Times magazine by a junior officer, probably, I think, a captain at the time. And this is what he envisioned the Middle East, how it should be redrawn, how it would be fixed, right? This was before the Islamic State, the ISIS grew, because it actually talks about an Islamic sacred state where Mecca and Medina are now. This was before ISIS grew, but it's this notion, it's this hubris that the outside has, thinking if here's a proposal for peace. We shift boundaries, we make people move, we create more homogenous territories. Somehow that's going to create peace. We've been doing this for very effectively, and I'd say that very sarcastically, for 100 years. And look what continues to perpetuate these types of conflicts around the world. It's a scary map to look at, because let's just divide these places up and try to promote national homogeneity this way. So for me, it gets, because I study these things, because I teach on these things regularly, because I have lots of friends and colleagues, people I would consider family members, who are in the midst of this in the Middle East at this point in time. It feels pretty overwhelming, and it feels, quite honestly, futile in many cases. Like, what can I do? I mean, sure, I have all this training, this background, these types of things. I'm in a position to be able to educate on this, but I really need to find ways to tangibly be involved. And nobody listens to me over there in terms of the political leadership. Very few in this at the national levels here or across Europe. But there are ways to be involved on a very grassroots way, and that's my segue into the American Civic Association, right? So I don't have lots of slides for the American Civic Association. We'll just leave it be. This is really a depressing map to stay on, but I think it's a good reminder for us to continue to talk. So I got involved with the ACA almost as soon as I arrived to Binghamton 12 years ago. I got invited to come down. They were doing an Islamic culture night, and I was invited to come down to speak as part of a panel there with Akbar Muhammad and Mullah Ali Bouanani, and it was that was my first exposure to it. It was like in the second semester I was here, type of a situation. In the winter we went down, and it was really, I was impressed. And then I just kept orbiting back there. Here's an opportunity to be able to be involved in something that's actually doing work here on the ground, right? Those of you who aren't familiar with the American Civic Association, and it's been around since 1939 here in Binghamton, and it was founded with the goal and the mission to basically help new Americans succeed and integrate into the area. And so to provide critical immigration services and refugee asylee resettlement into the area. And so it's been doing that since 1939. And it's a wonderful organization that has gone through its ups and downs, and the doors nearly closed during the pandemic. It was really quite difficult. I was invited to join the board in 2016. And because of some of the scholarship and also the teaching and engaged teaching that I was working with, I took a group of students. You might remember this. I think I talked about this here several years ago, but take a group of students to the island of Leros, the Greek island of Leros, to basically volunteer in a refugee shelter that was there. This was a shelter, not a camp. It was where the most at risk from the camp were taken. And we had the opportunity to really basically see what is happening on a grassroots level. And then it got me thinking, well, how can I be more involved in our local areas? And I had a lot of students come up to me afterwards and go, I get to go back home to my wonderful life, but my friends that I've made here have to remain, and there's not a darn thing I can do about it. Right? So I said, so I got us thinking, what can we do on our local level? I may not have a direct impact on things over there, but I can. Where we're most empowered is right here in our own communities. These are our networks. These are the folks we know. The politicians most of the time do listen to us because they're right here, right? And so that got me involved in the ACA, wanting to find a grassroots, non-denominational civil society organization to be able to work with. And I got bamboozled to become part of the leadership. I was a vice president at one point just before the pandemic broke out, and things got really difficult there. And then there was a huge restructuring as the pandemic opened, we opened up again. And I feel sometimes how I got to be president of the board was, the old cartoons where they have a line of soldiers and they're asking somebody to volunteer and everybody steps back except one idiot who doesn't realize I'm that idiot. No, but seriously, this was a chance to really help guide and work in the ACA very closely and try to create a board that's very engaged, that brings a wealth of skills to it, from banking, from real estate, from insurance, from all across different sectors of the economy and society here in this area, to be able to be engaged. And we have a very vibrant board that's very engaged, and we are able to hire a new executive director and deputy director, kind of change some of the situation in there where there was just so much. Maybe you remember, Myra Garcia. There was so much on her shoulders all the time. Everything worked through her that it was such a huge burden on her shoulders. We were trying to restructure things so that there could be a lot more support in there. And we're professionalizing the board and learning a lot. Myra had done such an amazing job for so many years. She was ready to step back, and working with her, and we're so grateful for all that she's done, but trying then now to reimagine what the ACA can do coming out of the pandemic. We had lost our refugee resettlement status as a result of the Trump administration. We were considered too small because we were settling roughly 50 people a year into the area from around the world. We were considered too small, that they wanted at least 100. And then obviously no refugees really came in at all during the Trump administration. So that was a bit of a moot point, but we had lost that resettlement status, but we've now regained it with the International Rescue Committee. And so we're doing this once again in the area. We've resettled this since May 23 individuals, mostly from Syria at this point in time in the local area. But if you hadn't noticed, the pandemic really changed much of the demographic around the region. You can go into the ACA's archives and their case files going back to the 1940s, and you can kind of chart what was going on in the world by who was coming through the ACA very clearly. And it's amazing just how diverse, how we have these pockets of communities that immigrated into the region, were resettled into the region, that are incredibly diverse and represent all across the globe. And what we've been trying to do, though, is leverage those capabilities in those communities to be able to create structure and actually live up to what we as the board and the Hussein Adams and Leila Hernandez, who are the executive director and the deputy director now at the ACA, the vision that the ACA, what it can do. We are the only organization in the southern tier in this region that does this. And there's such a need and a capacity that we really need to expand. Give you a quick note of just kind of how the demographics in the region have changed. Before the pandemic, there may be 12 to 14 Bengali families in the region who had been in the United States for a long time, but of Bengali origin, Bangladesh. Now, since the pandemic, there are now close to 400 in the area. And that's just Bengali. Pakistani, Syrian, Afghan, Ukrainian, right? You take your pick. It has grown tremendously. Now, those folks who make up the Bengali community now here in the area, many of them moved up from the city, right? Moved up during this time period. They're looking to get out of the city, more affordable life, these types of situations. And many of them came. These weren't people coming directly from Bangladesh during the pandemic, but many of them moved up into the area. And so this is created, and this is with my multiple hats as director of the Middle East and North Africa Studies Center, the center for it at Binghamton. We're doing a lot of outreach with the local K through 12 schools. And there's a huge need in UE, in ME, and other places out in the Endicott area, Endwell area, right, for help with cultural competencies. When you only had maybe 12 families in all of those school districts, but now you have so many, there's the teachers are realizing we need to understand a whole lot more about these communities and what they bring. How do we be able to relate to the families, talk to them, understand where they're coming from? And obviously everybody's situation is unique, but there are basic cultural competencies that every school needs support in helping. And this is just one example, right? This is just one example of the amazing things that the ACA in partnership with other organizations are trying to do, right? So just to give you how am I doing on time?
Fine.
Yeah, okay, good. I just want to give you a quick breakdown. So let me back up a little bit. So I did get this wonderful it's a double-edged sword, though. This wonderful grant from the Department of Education, it's called Title VI. It's to fund a National Resource Center for Middle East Studies here in the area. This is a $1 million, 3-year $1 million grant, and it can be renewable if we do our job right. And what we're supposed to be doing is this outreach primarily into K through 12 schools. This is the type of grant that usually just the very wealthy metropolitan institutions of higher education get, and so it's a big deal to get this at a medium-sized public institution up in this region, which is predominantly rural, not metropolitan. And it's a double-edged sword because there's all this reporting back to the for this. There's also, because it's comes from government money, there's lots of reporting that needs to be done, but it also enables us to do a lot of outreach and to make partnerships with different groups. And because I wear 2 hats here at the university and at the ACA is one of our major institutional local partners in doing this work, especially trying to reach out and engage with the Middle East and North Africa diaspora communities that are in the region. And so with that help, we are able to, we're able to we're working on marshaling the skills and resources of the university with the needs of the ACA and their skills. And the ACA has roughly, it has 5 different main departments in it now. Right? It went from 5 employees now to 27 over this past year, in terms of trying to expand the needs that the region has and meet those needs. And so the 5 main departments now, excuse me for just a second. There's no spotlight, but I feel like there's a spotlight. So excuse me. So there are 5 major departments at the ACA now. One of them is the Refugee Resettlement Program, RNP as the acronym, and they work very closely. This is the group of it has a director and several assistants or caseworkers with this, and this is the job of the RNP to receive refugees from the International Rescue Committee, who works with the United States government, this process, and we're responsible for their resettlement into this area, responsible just about for everything for them for the first 90 days to help them get settled in. Because these folks are coming in with permanent residency in the United States. They have access to all services, all rights in the area. If they're children, get them enrolled in school, find them jobs, get them housing, obviously. And that's the housing is the hardest part, because there's very strict regulations about what kind of place these folks get to be resettled in, right? It's not just your typical student housing, perhaps, or other things like that, right? It's there's very strict requirements of what they need. Then it's getting them registered for social services. It's getting them into the kids enrolled in school. It's finding jobs. It's getting them into English classes if they need it. It's doing all the whole spectrum of things that they need in the first 90 days. And then those folks, after the first 90 days, are transitioned to the next department, which is the Refugee Social Support Services. Social Services Program. Sorry, getting it all mixed up. The Refugee Social Services Program that they have. And this continues to assist folks that are resettled into the area, asylees and refugees, for 5 years. So that if there's need to update a resume, if there's need to help them find another job, help them find new housing, maybe they outgrew it or it's time to move, or if they were renting something, the landlord sold it, they have to find someplace else, whatever reason, it's there to help support these folks for the next 5 years. And then it has its own director and caseworkers in the Refugee Support Services Program. Then there's Immigration Services, is the third major department. And that has a director and then several immigration caseworkers. These folks are DOJ accredited, so Department of Justice accredited caseworkers. They go through enormous amounts of training in order to be able to give legal advice, immigration legal advice to folks. And they do everything from a change of status, somebody got married, update with that, to citizenship, to help to try and stave off deportation orders, to work with DACA and undocumented folks, right? To try and help people get documentation and to change status with the gold standard of being able to become U.S. citizens themselves. So that's what the Immigration Services does. That's the third. The fourth is grants and finance, right? So there's a lot of grants, application and reporting that need to be done. ACA is a nonprofit. And so we have a dynamic grants writer. She's really fantastic. And we have our finance manager who's in charge of the bean counter. They're basically make sure everything is properly documented, but they have to do all of this paperwork and reporting for the grants that we have. We have 7 major grants that I'll get into in a second that help support the services that we provide there. And then finally, we have an events and fundraising department. This is where, because of some of the grants, we have to do numerous community workshops. I think nearly 60 in the year, maybe. Am I right? I'll probably get corrected. So this gets put on YouTube and I'll get corrected, but it's a very large number, 45 to 60 workshops a year, which are supposed to be focused on helping immigrants to know their rights to get settled into the area. So these workshops range from, know your rights as an immigrant, as a renter, as a homeowner, to how to open a bank account, how to get a driver's license, all of those steps that we take for granted because we grew up in the area or we have those connections, but all those steps that when new folks come into the area, you got to try and navigate the bureaucracy, right? Navigate. How do you get registered for social services? How do you get your kids into school? All these types of things that these workshops. So this is what the events does. But we also do our annual Garlic Festival, our All Nations Parade, International Refugee Day, these types of opportunities for fundraisers. And we're going to be restarting the First Friday Culture Nights. So on December 1st, from 6 to 8, down at the ACA, the center I direct up on campus is sponsoring a culture night for Middle East and North Africa culture at the ACA on December 1st, First Friday there. So come on down. It's a $5 cover charge. It's a fundraiser for them, and you'll get some great food, music, dance, these types of situations. There's, as you know, I painted a very bleak picture of what's going on in the Middle East, but there's also incredibly wonderful cultures, incredibly wonderful people, and this is a chance to celebrate some of that night. So that's one of these other events. We're going to be restarting those culture nights that used to be a staple here on First Fridays pre-pandemic, and those are the main departments at the ACA, and each of those departments has caseworkers, as I said, interns and volunteers that help. We have an extensive internship program through Binghamton University, primarily through their Center for Community and Public Administration, their College of Community and Public Administration, and also through the Human Rights Institute and through other programs up on campus where we have an internship program where students can get access and get this experience who have a passion for immigration-related issues. And so this is what the ACA is up to. This is what we're doing. And so our 7 major grants are the Office of New Americans. This is our largest grant. This is a New York-based and sponsored organization. This helps provide funding for staff and immigration services. It also pays the fees for the folks who are applying for these through this O&A grant, so that the gold standard is to hopefully get them to citizenship situation, right? So that's our biggest grant that we have, is the Office of New Americans. We have the Ukrainian Supplemental Appropriations and to Resettlement Agencies. This is USARA. This is an enormous grant that New York State, Governor Hochul, has put out specifically for Ukrainian resettlement. And then there's the Assistance to Migrant Program, the Welcoming New York Grant, the Refugee Support Social Services Program that I talked to you about. And then there's New York State Enhanced Services to Refugee Program and the New York State Department of Health Wellness. These are the 7 major grants that we have that help fund most of the operations that we do. But we have our own fundraising. We, because we've been around for so long, notwithstanding the shooting that took place there, the mass shooting that took place there in 2009, we are well known in the community. We have wonderful support across the political spectrum in our local area, and it gives me some hope and some faith that, notwithstanding the national discourse on refugees and immigration, here it doesn't matter necessarily what party you belong to or where you're from. People see the benefit in our community of being a welcoming place, a place that is made stronger because folks coming into the area from all over the world, right? So this is a huge benefit here. It's very encouraging. What we've been able to accomplish. There's always challenges ahead, and it's difficult from one administration to the next sometimes on the national level, but we really haven't run into that here on the local level. There's always folks that could be a little bit more supportive, right? But I think what we have here and what gives me hope is that we can have a huge impact on our local community because this is our home, right? We have the networks here. Generally speaking, politicians have to listen to us because election margins are so narrow. Use it to our advantage to be able to help folks out and support folks that in turn are supporting us and enriching our community too. So I think I will stop it there for questions. Does that sound good? All right. Yes, please.
You're probably familiar with the birds, the 13 birds
yes.
that fly across the street from the ACA.
Yeah, the memorial.
I was greatly involved in that project.
Thank you.
I did much of the grant writing for George Akel and Jeff Lake, who are local community people. High recognition went out into the community and actually raised money for it. But we felt that we had to recognize that horrible day that took place there.
Absolutely. And we have an annual commemoration at the ACA for this now too, where local political leaders will go down on the date in commemoration of it, because that memorial is beautiful. And this happened prior to my moving into the area and learning more about it and learning at some of the, that was something that almost shut the ACA down as well. And that there were difficulties between the ACA and the fundraising for that memorial. I continue to learn about how much healing still needs to happen, how much support needs to, please.
A young man by the name of David Marsland, who lost his wife in that shooting, came to my Rotary Club one day and spoke about the memorial. And I said, David, you really need some heavy hitters in the community to go make the money happen.
Step up for that. No. And it's a beautiful memorial. It's really beautiful. Yes, please.
This is very, very grassroots, but from the time my children were infants, we participated in exchange programs and posting programs.
Yes.
And I'm wondering what kind of opportunities there are for that now. For instance, when 50 years ago, we hosted a young man from the university, as the university was looking for host families just to be in touch with somebody, provide a welcome, and get together with them occasionally. We've had various exchange programs with teachers, Russian judges, and I feel that these go a great ways in promoting a better knowledge of who we in this country are, and for people to take back home or whatever, and for us and our families and friends to understand better.
Yeah.
What opportunities like that are there now?
Yeah.
Where, because most of us don't have young children anymore, but for hosting international people, being a friend in the community and so on. Because I think that really helps. Yes. Language notwithstanding.
Right, right. So I only have anecdotal information about that. That's not necessarily within the purview of what I've been experienced to. I've been the beneficiary of Fulbright grants to go over to Turkey, for instance, as a student. But obviously the hosting, all of that shut down during the pandemic, and now it's coming back again. And so the university has a very diverse international student population and faculty population. I always think that the university could probably do more to be involved and get the community involved in it and overcome that gown and town type of divide. This isn't meant as a, I'm not trying to throw the university under the bus, but there can always be more. There can always be better opportunities. I think part of that is getting the students involved in service projects in the community, finding ways. The Center for Civic Engagement up on campus does that a lot. There are Fulbright faculty, or some of those in our own department, John, right, who have been heavily involved in that. But that's mostly sending students abroad. But there's also then the reception of students and faculty here as well. It can be. It's an excellent way to look at it. When we first moved into the area, we had an exchange student who was at Binghamton High School from Brazil. And it's getting those things moving again, I think, in the pandemic. But that's just anecdotal. I don't have direct involvement in those types of things, but it's a great way to build those relationships on the grassroots level. Absolutely. Please.
I was a volunteer coordinator for 25 years at UHS, and we had a lot of programs from different agencies. Like I think of BOCES immediately, where they had a lot of these immigrants come, and then they needed jobs, so they came to volunteer at the hospital and became aides actually, and then went out perhaps and got jobs. You mentioned earlier that there are volunteer opportunities with the ACA.
Yes.
Like what? What would someone be able to do?
Basically everything that I listed there with all the different departments, and from events to everything, but they're in need of volunteers, right, to help support. One of the biggest things that we're finding, and something that we're working on as a board right now, is creating some type of a support network, whether it's a group, to be able to find somebody who could lead that group for folks that are resettling into the area, particularly refugees and asylees, right? We're thinking maybe a social service, a social worker that could lead that, but we're always looking for opportunities. We're always looking for volunteers who are willing to kind of step in and help shoulder some of the burden that comes in terms of helping resettle people, but connecting in terms of jobs, in terms of understanding how the schools work, what neighborhoods maybe are affordable, all those types of things. There's this need. And so I would encourage you, if you want to volunteer, reach out to Leila Hernandez, who is the deputy director there at the ACA. She's in charge of the volunteer and internships opportunities. And then there's also Tamar. She's the events coordinator, and she would be able to help you out. She does with those types of things. There's always a great need for volunteers. I hope that answered your question.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Please, John.
Okay, thanks very much for a really excellent talk that has taught me a whole lot. I've been around here for years, but I now know much more about ACA than I did before. So I have a kind of a two-part question. First of all, what in your mind is sort of the biggest challenge facing the ACA? I'm sure there are a bunch. And then to flip it, what are the most, looking to the future, what are the most exciting opportunities about how ACA could function?
Right. So there's a couple big challenges, as you might have seen from our donors, from our grants that I listed. Basically, 80% of our budget comes from New York State grants. So what happens if those go away or there's a change in administration? Right. So that's always a huge challenge, is the fundraising, is being able to keep the lights on and keep being active the way we really see the mission of the ACA as, right? To be able to have the folks and the personnel who are passionate about and skilled to be able to help in these capacities of, helping new Americans succeed type of a situation. That's our new motto that we've branded, helping new Americans succeed. That's what we need to do. And so that's a big thing. It's just, as a nonprofit, to be crude, it's money, 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 quite honestly. But it's also being able to have the support and the structure in place that if someone leaves, gets sick, retires, moves on to another job, there's somebody to step in, and it's not reinventing the wheel again, right? To have structures in place, a strong involved board with multiple networks to be able to meet all these needs that the ACA may have. And so those are some of the biggest challenges that we have, is just it's supporting the people who are there, because they're the ones who are doing this work every single day. I'm a volunteer, right? I do spend a lot of time with this, but in the end, that's not my profession. It's not my job. And there's limits of what I can do, but it's having the community support. That's a big issue. One of the biggest issues, and I think I touched upon this now as we continue to receive and help resettle refugees into the area, is housing. That's the biggest struggle that we have, is finding appropriate housing in the area. So any of you who have contacts, who can give referrals, this is always one of the biggest struggles that we have, is finding appropriate housing that's not out in the middle of nowhere, that has access maybe to public transportation. These types of situations, that's critical. So that's probably the thing that keeps us up the most, is where do we find appropriate housing for these folks to be able to put down roots and get their lives going again after such disruption. Some of these folks that are being resettled in the area, they've been in camps since 2011, right? It's a very long time. And they finally were able to get over here. It's crazy. It's a crazy situation. So those those are some of our immediate concerns. Going into the future, I'll be right there with you, Susan, just a second. But going into the future, making these connections with other like-minded groups in the area, over in Utica, Syracuse, Ithaca, making these connections and really kind of trying to create a synergy, a broader network. Because when folks get resettled in the area and have status, they don't have to stay here. Some of them hit the first winter and we're out of here. We're going where it's warmer. But that situation. And so it's trying to create these broader regional networks that can help, not supervision, but the notion of support if they decide to go elsewhere. That's a big thing in the future for us that would be really, really helpful, because then we're not all reinventing the wheel in our little, this is all, New York. It's the same types of laws that govern the same types of situations. So how can we better partner across? I think that's a really exciting thing for us moving into the future. Sorry, Susan.
This might be too large of a question for this forum, but how does a person make the leap from a refugee camp to coming to the United States?
It's such a long, crazy process for most. And it's very capricious at different times, meaning it's not as standardized as we would all hope it could be, or as equal, and who has access and who doesn't. So I'll take one example of a person who was recently resettled into the area. She's now 93 and was in a camp for 10 years in northern Iraq and wanting to be reunited with her son, who is a resident here in the area. Even when you're not a threat, as you would not expect an 83-year-old woman to be a public security threat, but still, that process of getting registered, recognized, then figuring out what you want to do as once you get the status of refugee, finding some place who will accept you in type of a situation, having the contacts in that other area. It is a long, brutal process. And at least there's a process with it. You know, it's very, very difficult. And the home country that is hosting you at the present has their own, interjects their own politics and other sovereign priorities in those types of situations too. There's what's considered 3 durable solutions for refugees. The gold standard, what everybody wants, is repatriation into the country from where you left. That's what the international community wants once it's safe. There's no refoulement, as they say. The second is integration into the area that you fled to. So for most, it would be, in Syria, most would be integrating into Turkey. Now, Turkey doesn't have UNHCR camps in it because they run their own camps, type of a situation. So that could be another barrier to people getting through it. That's local sovereignty. And then the third area is resettlement, generally speaking, into a global north country, right? And there's very unequal burden sharing, as I mentioned or alluded to earlier. It's the regions in the global south, the countries right next door to a country that is in upheaval and people are fleeing, to the countries right next door. There's very little that the global north in comparison does. And so that process of resettlement for the vast majority of people who are refugees is not their first choice either, right? For others, it is. And so it's just a long process. It's really, really crazy. And then, that was the whole campaign issue, 2016, related to 2015 and 16 about, what was the term used? Extreme vetting or whatever. It's already extreme how these folks are vetted and what they have to go through. Yeah, it's pretty bleak in many cases. Sorry, I'm a downer of a person, I'm a public speaker. I apologize.
Could you say something more about the refugees getting jobs in the area? I mean, I'm reminded, there's the Chobani gigs where several industries really proactively set out. Does the ACA work with local industries?
Yes.
Try to get them to hire?
Yes. What's wonderful is coming out of the pandemic and being reinvigorated. The ACA, we had people coming out of the woodwork, BOCES, Job Corps, other things going, you're back. We need workers because there's more jobs than there are workers in the area. With Amazon coming in, with Dick's Sporting Good Warehouse, with all these different places around, there's a lot of demand for not just entry level, but good, decent paying jobs that are affordable in this area as people are transitioning in, trying to get their credentials from their home country recognized, that whole process. So there's been a lot of help, and a lot of businesses have been reaching out to us about that, from dry cleaners to schools to to the warehouses, shipping and delivering, all sorts of different places, because there's a real demand for that, and it's been very encouraging. Yeah, please.
I was just wondering, you mentioned that there are partnerships with schools to build cultural competence. Yes. So is that like training for teachers?
Yes. Yeah. So through the Center for Middle East and North Africa Studies, that's another hat I'm wearing. But yes, it's the K through 12, working with the local schools, and we've met with teachers now in the Catskills region, here in Broome County, and others, basically going in and talking with them. What do you need? They don't have room in the curriculum to create a new course. That's not how it works. But can we create modules, supplemental things? So if they're doing United States history and they want to do something about foreign policy, boom, they're doing European history, they want something that's related to that. If they're for science, technology, engineering, and math, you can build case studies for them to be able to deal with petroleum extraction or shipping lanes or economic development. All these types of things that we are going in and helping with. The cultural competency side is also that. It's, can we come in and do a training for you? We will be running professional development workshops this summer for teachers from around the region who want to come. They have to have certain professional development hours each year, and this will fit it. And we've had some of the teachers that are like, can we just take a class? We want to go back to school for a little bit. It's been really encouraging and fun but also sobering, because some of the teachers have directly spoken to me about, this current issue in Gaza. All our students are seeing what's on social media. They want to know what's going on, and they're like, they're looking to me, or they're looking to their teachers for guidance, for you're the teacher type of a situation, and then teachers need support from the day-to-day to their own curricular development to the cultural competency. So we're going to be doing a parent celebrating cultural diversity night in the ME in the ME district for the elementary school kids, where we can help to pair up with get some students with language skills to be able to help with the parents and the teachers there, just to kind of break down some of the barriers that automatically happen when there's a communication barrier, but also help the teachers and the students understand the cultures that are coming in. So that will coincide with just before Ramadan, that the month of fasting in Islam starts, and just to be able to do some of these things with them. No, that's the kind of stuff that we're working on, just to help that integration and that ability to be able to celebrate the cultural differences coming in, but also be educated on them. So if there is a 12-year-old who's fasting for Ramadan, the teachers don't come up and say, you have to eat. You're in the lunchroom. You have to eat. I'm like, no, I'm not supposed to. Basic things like that. So, please.
Last year at UE, we got a memo during Ramadan saying to be aware that some of our students might be dozy, a little sleepy, a little grouchy. I remember that they hadn't eaten or drunk water.
Yeah, during the daylight hours.
I don't remember. I'd never forget. I knew what was happening, but I'd never had an actual memo about it till last year. But it was very helpful because the number of Muslim students is increasing.
It is, and it's just the ability for people to feel seen, recognized, and validated. You're okay here. You don't have to change who you are coming in here. Where can we meet you at type of a situation. So that's that. I hope that answered your question. Wonderful. So.
I think we're almost at the end of our hour. If there are no further questions, then thank you so much, Ken.
Thank you.